Welcome back to Stranger Stitches. I've got a big one for us today. So many connections and so much information. I'm going to get through this as best we can. And remember, this is not a news story. This information is compiled from publicly available sources and compiled in my own way. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer, May 21st, 1960, a Gemini. My nestmate is a Gemini. Yeah, good luck with them. They a handful. I'm going to be clear as glass. I am not excusing or making reasons for any of his crimes. I want to know what life experiences contributed to what he became. So grab you a sweet tea and a ball of yarn, and let's get started. You know, I always get the feels for these guys when they're little kids. I always wonder if something had changed for them. Would their lives have been different? It's also my personal belief that there is such thing as inherent evil. So that is my own personal cognitive dissonance. But he came from a toxic foundation. The Dahmer marriage was a disaster from the start. Joyce had very unstable mental health, was always having fits, causing arguments, severe depression, and mood swings. Lionel, he claims he didn't have the ability to keep up with it, and this made a totally toxic environment. Lionel was seeking an advanced degree, and he was out of the house a lot, and when he was home, he was not engaged. Shortly after Joyce got pregnant, she began suffering from seizures. Apparently, some of it stemmed from their neighbor's kitchen and some foul odors that she perceived, and this caused them to need to move to Lionel's parents' home. During the latter months of her pregnancy, Joyce suffered from increased mental breakdowns and seizures, which, according to her doctor, were rooted in her mental state and nothing physical. But this aggravated her already pretty bad prescription drug dependency to barbiturates and morphine, to the point of taking as many as 26 pills a day and being constantly sedated to what she says ease her pain. You know, a lot of people been pregnant. A lot of people dealt with it in other ways, even when it got painful. Now, I'm sure that all those pills had nothing to do with anything, right? That was child abuse right before he was even hatched. And what freaking doctor was still signing those scripts while she was knocked up? Or was she getting them from other sources? It didn't say. But, you know, by 1960, everybody knew better. Let me tell you a little bit about what I know that these things can cause. Babies are born with something called NAS. Yeah, that's when babies are born addicted. That is neonatal abstinence syndrome. Yeah, and the first thing, right out of the chute, the first thing that child has got to do is sober up. Yeah, and got to come down from the drugs. Now, there are things that can be done for an addicted infant, but I don't find any sources that said he received any treatment for it. Now, here's some of the things that can happen. They start crying, and this is not just regular crying. It's the kind of scream that a mom recognizes that something is big wrong. They get tremors, sleep disturbances, feeding difficulties, and respiratory issues. So yeah, little man was dealing with a lot. As a child, Jeffrey had made himself a toy out of a pail of some animal bones. According to Lionel, Jeffrey was oddly thrilled, his words, by the sound of the bones and became preoccupied with animal bones, which he called his fiddlesticks. It is said that our Jeffrey was an energetic and happy child, but became more subdued after he got a surgery for double hernia right before his 4th birthday. Did he get the care and attention that a sick and hurt child needs? Did he get more pain meds? Was he still dealing with any of that? Or did Mom take the pain meds herself? It isn't a stretch to think so, but that's only an opinion. At elementary school, Jeffrey was regarded as quiet and timid. One teacher recalled later that she saw signs of abandonment. Yeah, said he was unwashed, unkept, always hungry due to his father's absence and his mother's illness. I'm sure that drew some negative attention from his fellow students because kids can be assholes. And these symptoms increased when Joyce became pregnant with their second child. And after she gave birth that second time, she went full postpartum psychosis. No evidence that she received any treatment. Jeffrey was molested by a neighbor at the age of 8. He had an emotionally unavailable mother who was hypochondriac by that time and spent most of her time in bed or tending to little brother. And this absent father didn't help him process this event. He was left on his lonesome to sort it out. And what did he learn? What did that non-reaction teach him? He learned that that act was no big deal. In high school, Jeffrey's behavior became increasingly disturbing. His classmates knew him as the weird little nobody kid that nobody wanted to talk to or be around. He had earned himself a reputation for some bizarre outburst. Yeah, running down the hallway screaming about tornado drills, papers flying everywhere. Students would just shake their heads and say, "Oh, he's doing a Dahmer," and they just walk away. Sad truth was some classmates would actually pay him to make these distractions when they needed to get out of class or didn't want to test. Can you imagine a boy so desperate for any kind of attention that he would perform for them like a monkey for some chump change and their amusement? But I guess he needed booze money. They'd laugh at him, talk about him behind his back, but nobody ever extended a hand to help him. Jeffrey was already hitting the bottle pretty hard during these years. He'd bring his liquor to school and tell anyone that asked that it was his medicine. Some of his classmates were scared of him, thought he was creepy and strange, and that was true. I mean, yeah. So there he was, completely alone, all that pain and anger building up inside of him. He later reflected on those years, saying that he felt like a joke, that nobody liked him, and his father would tell him to be more, quote, normal. But what the hell does normal even look like? He didn't have an example. What does it mean to be normal when your worlds come apart? The isolation was eating him, and the drinking just made everything worse. You know you're not supposed to drink alone, right? Well, I do have a glass of wine alone sometime, but I ain't, we just don't make a habit of drinking alone all the time. It makes bad habits. And you can see that those high school years were stirring the monster batter that he was made from. Now, not all divorces can be seen as failures. Maybe the marriage lasted as long as it was supposed to, and the couple parts as friends and go along get on as friends. That was not even close to what happened in the Dahmer family. When the Dahmers split, they fought tooth and nail over custody of the little brother who was 6 years younger than Jeffrey. There was much discussion, debate, and worry over who should have custody of little brother, where he should live, and what time would be split between the parents. There is no mention of Jeffrey and what should happen to him, or where he would be expected to live. He was 17, almost 18, and the parents were no longer legally responsible. And y'all know that not every kid is ripe when they're 18. They need a little more time in the nest. Jeffrey wasn't given that choice. Both parents moved on and left him at home. Yeah, left him there. The parents each thought he was with the other, and no one bothered to ask or to speak with him directly. He was left in that house. No food, no money, a broken refrigerator, no friends or safe place to be. So what happened? I'm going to tell y'all what happened. He committed his first murder. He committed this murder 3 weeks after graduating from high school. He picked up an 18-year-old Stephen Mark Hicks, and he was hitchhiking. Lured him back to his home. When Hicks wanted to leave, Dahmer bludgeoned him with a dumbbell and strangled him. Now, remember that dumbbell. The topic's going to come up again later. Following the murder, Dahmer engaged with intimacy with Mark post-mortem. Fulfilling his long held fantasy. And you know what? I'm about to lose my breath. Let me pause this for just a second. He fulfilled his long-held fantasy of control and dominance. Then he dismembered and disposed of the remains, later confessing, and I quote, "You don't forget your first one." The murder of Stephen Hicks was just the beginning of a deadly series. He hadn't intended to kill the boy that day, but wasn't sorry he did. Well, Lionel hadn't wasted any time getting himself hooked up again, and he got remarried. Sherry Dahmer became Jeffrey's stepmother. So while Jeffrey was busy killing hitchhikers, Lionel had moved on to his next chapter. Let's go on to his college failure and military service. Jeffrey Dahmer enrolled at Ohio State University, OSU, hoping to major in business. His only term at OSU was a complete flop, largely because he couldn't sober up. He received failing grades in Introduction to Anthropology, Classical Civilization, and Administrative Sciences. The only course he had been successful at was riflery, where he received a B-. His overall GPA, y'all sit down, oh my gosh, was .45 on the 4-point system. On one occasion, Lionel paid a surprise visit to his son, only to find his dormitory room strewn with empty liquor bottles. Yeah. Despite his father having paid in advance for a second term, Dahmer dropped out of OSU after just 3 months. Well, Dad said what many dads at the time did: get a job or go to the military. Dahmer joined the military, went in the Army. Records show that his first year of service was average or slightly above average. He originally enlisted to serve with the military police, but Dahmer had been reassigned to medical training instead. He was sent to Baumholder, Germany, where he had a couple posters, rock posters of Iron Maiden in his room. One source, and just one, so I don't know for sure, I couldn't verify this, but it said he also spent hours poring over a children's picture book about the troll and the billy goats. I wonder where he got that book. Why a grown-ass man was interested in a children's book. But like I said, one source, and it can't be proven. He also liked to tell W.C. Fields jokes. He once had a bunkmate, name withheld for privacy, and gave him a birthday card with a beer mug on it and the Fields punchline, "To a fellow guzzler," he wrote on the card. So he was the type to remember a birthday and give a card. That doesn't play in, but it could be a little bit of his sick, kind of snarky poking at the kid. The bunkmate would later come forward with allegations of assault during his time with Dahmer. Another soldier, name withheld for privacy, came forward and accused Dahmer of drugging and assaulting him in an armored personnel vehicle. And the first one said it had probably happened 8 to 10 times. I don't know. The bunkmate told the Independent paper. He was tying me to the bunk with a motor pool rope. He took my clothing from me. He would either beat me before or after he committed what he came there to do. And I have to soften this a little for YouTube requirements. And were there any questions? Did anybody ask this young man about the marks a beating would leave? I have questions. 10 times, and they never got caught. No one ever heard them. I have a lot of questions. So no one reported anything or asked to change rooms or to transfer. And what did Jeffery learn from this? Again, yeah, it's no big deal. Well, it was his love of the drink that earned him a discharge for alcohol-related issues. Dahmer was separated from the service under Chapter 9 as it pertained to substance abuse. His superiors decided that, Dahmer's drinking and drugs only impaired his ability to function as a soldier, but because no one in charge thought that his drinking and performance problems would have a significant impact on his ability to function as a civilian, Dahmer got an honorable discharge. Well, once he was out of the Army, he was no longer their problem, and honestly, I don't know if there was much they could do about it anyway. He was sent to Fort Jackson in South Carolina for a debriefing and provided with a plane ticket to travel anywhere in the country. Dahmer later said that he felt he couldn't return home. He couldn't go home and face his father, so he opted to go to Miami Beach in Florida. Well, there's 2 reasons. Because he was tired of the cold in Germany, and he wanted to attempt to live by his own means. In Florida, Dahmer found a job at a deli. Yeah, a deli, working with a lot of slicers and stuff. Okay. Moving on, he rented a room in a nearby hotel, but he spent most of his salary on alcohol and soon got kicked out of the motel for non-payment. After his eviction, he spent evenings and spent the night on the beach. He did continue to work at the sandwich shop until, circumstances being what they were, he gave in, dropped a dime, called his father, and asked to come home to Ohio. So Dad helps him get home, and Jeffrey initially lived with his father and stepmother. He insisted on being delegated some chores to occupy his time while he went and looked for work. He continued to drink. Yeah, and 2 weeks after his return, he was arrested for drunken disorderly. Yeah, P.I., drunk in public. He was fined $60 and given a suspended 10-day jail sentence. It didn't take long for his folks to get a mouthful of his shenanigans, and they, kind of sent him off to his paternal grandmother, Catherine Dahmer, in West Allis, Wisconsin. She was the only one in the family to whom Jeffrey ever displayed any positivity or affection, and they hoped that both her influence and the change of location, get him some new scenery, might persuade him to quit drinking or at least slow down, find a job, and try to live responsibly. Now, I don't know why they thought an old lady would be able to cope with this, but Grandma, here we are at Grandma's house. Initially, the living arrangements with his grandmother were very harmonious. He took her to church and went with her, willingly undertook chores, participated in the household, and he abided by most of her house rules, although he continued to drink and smoke. Oh, Lord. In the early part of 92, he found employment as a phlebotomist. Yeah, getting blood out of people at the Milwaukee Blood and Plasma Center. And he held this job for a total of 10 months before they laid him off. I don't think it was had anything to do with him at this time. Dahmer remained unemployed for over 2 years. And yeah, he sort of lived hand to mouth on whatever money his grandmother gave him. But shortly before losing that job, Dahmer was arrested for indecent exposure. Yeah, at the Wisconsin State Fair Park. He was observed exposing himself, and it is said in the report that there were about 25 people, including women and children. For this incident, he was convicted and fined $50 plus court cost. I wonder if Grandma paid that too. Ugh. In 85, Dahmer was hired as a mixer at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, where he worked from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 6 nights a week, Saturday evenings off. Shortly thereafter, when he started this, oh boy, yeah, he started the job, and Dahmer was propositioned by another man while he was reading at the library. And although Dahmer did not respond to this proposition, the incident did stir something up. Yeah, he got on that control and dominance thing again. He had developed this as a teenager, and it never went away. So he began to familiarize himself with Milwaukee's gay bars and bathhouses and bookstores. All right, let me just tell y'all for a second. Dad was never cool with his son being gay. Never. Wanted him to try to not be gay. Lionel was a fundamentalist Christian and was always on the soapbox about that. And so Jeffrey was just feeling another form of rejection. So Jeffrey had become a regular at the bathhouses, which he described as being very relaxing places. But during his encounters, he became very frustrated at his partner moving around during the act. Oh dear. He said that he had trained himself to view people as objects and not as people. And for this reason, he began administering sleeping pills to his partners, giving them liquor laced with sedatives. After approximately 12 such instances, the bathhouse administration revoked Dahmer's membership. So he began to use hotel rooms to continue the practice. So the killing resumes. After a 9-year hiatus, Dahmer killed again. Do you believe that he really took 9 years off? Was he gratified enough by his activities in the bathhouses and in the hotel rooms that he didn't have to kill anybody? Or are there some that we didn't know about? Well, he met Stephen Tomey at a bar, lured him back to the Ambassador Hotel. Dahmer claimed he had no intention of killing Tomey, but woke to find him dead, beat to death. So what does he do? Buys a large suitcase and transport the body back to Grandma's basement, where he dismembered and disposed of the remains. James, known as Jamie Doxtator, was a 14-year-old boy. Became one of, well, I think it was the youngest victim. He was running away from an abusive stepfather, and you know what happened. Yeah, Dahmer picked him up outside a nightclub at a bus stop. You know what that child was doing out there, and I'm sorry, so sorry that he had to do that. Well, Dahmer reeled him in with the typical thing that he did, $50 to pose for pictures. So Jamie went back with him to his grandma's house. Once there, Dahmer drugged him with sleeping pills and had his way with the unconscious boy, then strangled him on the floor of the cellar. He left the body in the cellar for a week before dismembering him. He placed all of Doxtator's remains, excluding the skull, in the trash. The skull was boiled and cleansed in bleach before Dahmer found that it, too, had been made too brittle to keep by the bleaching process. He pulverized the skull 2 weeks later and threw it in the trash. Dahmer met Richard Guerrero outside a gay bar called the Phoenix. Same thing, lured him in, offered him $50 for the night, drugged him with sleeping pills and strangled him with a leather strap. Did things to the corpse. And but this time Dahmer dismembered Guerrero within 24 hours, again disposing of remains in the trash and retaining the skull to experiment on again. Again, the experiment failed. He pulverized it. Several months later, tossed it in the trash. And we come to the story of Conorak and Somsak. These are brothers. Somsak is the older brother. Conorak is the younger boy. And if this one don't break your heart, you don't have one. 3 years after he assaulted Somsak, this is the kid that made a report that got Dahmer arrested for his assault. Second degree sexual assault and enticing a minor for immoral purposes. Dahmer lured the younger brother to his apartment with the same exact lie, promising money for photographs. Conorak was aware of Dahmer but needed the money that bad. The family was struggling financially, so both boys were trying to help out any way they could, earning what money they could. When Conorak got to the apartment, Dahmer drugged the 14-year-old boy and tortured him, drilled a hole in his skull and filled it with some sort of acid. Somehow, some way, Conorak managed to escape from Dahmer's apartment and ran into the street naked and bleeding. Y'all want to hear about some sorry-ass police work? Here we go. He ran in the street. Conorak was a mess. And 3 women called 911. I think the 3 women were all together, not 3 separate calls, after they had found this naked and confused young man outside of Dahmer's apartment. Now, any fool could see this child was totally stressed, but the officers, no, they didn't think nothing was wrong. They handed him right back to Dahmer, who had spun them some yarn about the boy being his boyfriend. Never mind, the kid was clearly drugged and that he was bleeding. And the apartment reeked to high heaven. The officer said it smelled like excrement and decay. One of the officers even radioed back into their dispatch, laughing like he was some kind of fool, and reported intoxicated Asian naked male returned to sober boyfriend. My partner is going to get deloused at the station. End quote. That boy was murdered by Jeffrey Dahmer shortly thereafter. It turned your stomach, doesn't it? Dahmer was still on probation for what he did to Somsak, the older brother, when he murdered the younger brother, Conorak. Y'all, I had to sit with that a minute. Anthony Sears, whom he met at a gay bar. Dahmer lured Sears to grandmother's home where they engaged in adult activities, drugged and strangled Sears. The family was waiting for Sears to come home. He had recently achieved a promotion at work, and they was going to have a celebration dinner in honor of his moving on up. But they noticed right away that he didn't show up. It was unlike him to ditch his family. But this one, Dahmer said he found exceptionally attractive, and Sears was the first victim from whom he permanently retained the body parts. He preserved Sears' head and genitals in acetone and stored them in a wooden box, which he later placed in his work locker. So, Jeffrey's been asked to leave Grandma's house, and he did. He went and found his own apartment, taking Sears' mummified head and genitals back to the apartment. Although located in a high-crime area, who knew, right? Dahmer just moved in. It was close to his work. It was furnished $300 a month, including bills except electricity, so it was economical. He could have figured out a way to live independently had he not been such a fuckwit and a murderous bastard. Well, within 1 week of moving to this address, Dahmer got his 6th victim, Raymond Smith, a prostitute whom he had lured to his apartment with a promise of $50. People selling themselves for $50. Inside the apartment, he was given a drink with 7 sleeping pills, and then he was manually strangled. The following day, Dahmer purchased a Polaroid camera. You know what a Polaroid is? It's one of those that takes the cartridge type film and spits out pictures instantly. So at the time, you had to get your film developed unless you had one of these. He certainly could not take these pictures in for development. He'd have been arrested on the spot. So he laid out Smith's body in suggestive positions before dismembering him in the bathroom. He came across acquaintance Edward Smith and asked him over to the apartment. Drugged and strangled less than 3 months later, he met 22-year-old Ernest Miller outside a bookstore, and Dahmer attempted to try something extra, and Miller informed him that will cost you extra. Dahmer gave Miller a drink, but he only had 2 sleeping pills. On this occasion, Dahmer only had 2 to give the victim, so it didn't really knock him out, just made him real drowsy. And Dahmer had to settle for slashing the carotid artery with the same knife he used to dismember the bodies. Dahmer wrapped Miller's heart, liver, biceps, and portions of flesh from the legs in plastic bags and placed them in the freezer for later consumption. So he was spooling up, and those last 3 were real close together, so the cooling off period in between had gotten real short. Well, 3 weeks after the murder of Miller, Dahmer encountered a 22-year-old named David at the Grand Avenue Mall. In his statement to police after his arrest, Dahmer said that after giving Thomas a drink laced with sedatives, he did not feel attracted to him, but wasn't going to let him wake up, fearing that he would be angry over having been drugged. Therefore, he just strangled him and dismembered the body, intentionally retaining no body parts whatsoever because, y'all listen to this, these are his words, "He just wasn't my type. I'm after those Chippendale bodies." Yeah, his words, not mine. After that, Dahmer didn't kill anyone for 5 months. Although, on a minimum of 5 occasions between October and February, he unsuccessfully attempted to lure people to his apartment. Oh, Dahmer observed 17-year-old Curtis Strotter standing near a bus stop near the Marquette University. According to Dahmer, he lured Strotter into his apartment with an offer of money for posing for nudes. I'm getting tired of writing that. And then the added incentive of sex. Dahmer drugged Strotter, cuffed his hands behind his back, and then strangled him with the leather strap. Less than 2 months later, 19-year-old Errol Lindsay, walking out to get a key cut, Dahmer lured Lindsay in. This time he drilled a hole in his skull through which he injected hydrochloric acid with a turkey baster. According to Dahmer, Lindsay woke up after the experiment saying, "I have a headache, what time is it?" In response to this, Dahmer again drugged him and strangled him. Oh, goodness. 31-year-old aspiring model Tony Hughes was met at a nightclub. The same thing was done, injected hydrochloric acid in his skull to enable him to render him submissive, although on this occasion the drilling and injection was fatal. Well, other residents of the Oxford apartments had repeatedly complained to the building's manager of the foul smell emanating from apartment 213, in addition to the sounds of falling objects and the occasional sound of a chainsaw. This is what finally got him busted. Dahmer was apprehended when a victim, Tracy Edwards, escaped and led police back to Dahmer's apartment. Yeah, this was everything. This has gone all the way up to 1991. Police discovered the horrific scene, including Polaroid photos of dismembered males, pickled genitals, and heads in the refrigerator and receptacles full of decomposing human remains. Did y'all see when the police were trying to clean up the scene and all those blue plastic barrels they were taking out? Yeah, those were full of people. His crimes weren't merely violent. They were orchestrated to display his domination, a perverse assertion of ownership, achieved through brutalizing assault and murder. He sought not lovers, but subjugated beings. Puppets dancing to his tune. He wanted to make himself some zombie that would never leave him. All this time, alcohol was fueling him. And he was an engine of destruction. And this was still escalating in the substance abuse. So we know that he had been a drunk most all his life. And while he was juiced, he did the most heinous acts that anyone can imagine. But not just that. This was part of his strategy to overcome his internal restraints. Anything in his mind and body that said that this was the wrong thing to do, he used alcohol to deliberately dismantle his inhibitions. Any conscience he had left was shut up with booze. He used the alcohol to feed the monster and let him out. Yeah. In his career, he had dispatched and dismembered 17 men and boys. His later crime involved extreme acts, including necrophilia, cannibalism, and the preservation of body parts, typically skeletons. So he's making his little fiddlesticks again. He explained his cannibalism by stating, in his words, "I suppose in an odd way it made me feel they were even more a permanent part of me." Okay. He's busted. They've got him dead to rights this time. And his father, Lionel, decided that they needed a lawyer they could trust. So, just by chance, he was talking to a whole throng of reporters that were covering his son's case. Lionel Dahmer was given this man's name, a Philadelphia lawyer named Robert Mosender. And Mosender says he wasn't following the case when he gave an interview to Channel 3 News. And it was over dinner with the Dahmer family that Mosender agreed to take the case. His words, "My agreement with Jeffrey's father and family was to represent Jeffrey in a way that would get him to plead guilty, go to jail, keep the news and media and the circus atmosphere to a minimum. And that's why I was retained," Mosender said. The next step was to meet Jeffrey personally. The first impression was that this was a very handsome young man, he says. Looked like a normal person that would be, easily attracted to or to talk to. He was tall, handsome, and articulate. But after our conversation, you could see that there was nothing in his eyes. He had a personality that was void of any kind of empathy. Going through your head, I was like, this is crazy. I had no idea he had done so many terrible things. Mosenter remembers the encounter clearly all these years later, especially the weirdness and the media reaction that came along with it. His words, "I was bombarded after I interviewed him from the news media from all over the world, calling me all kinds of bogus people as well as legitimate people trying to get interviews," he said, "and my job, I was retained to protect them from all that. Jeffrey's father wanted the case to go as quickly as possible and achieve a life sentence is what that happened. Mosenter left the Akron courthouse that day and never looked back. He's had hundreds of criminal cases since, but he said he put Dahmer behind him. He says that he rarely accepts interviews about the case. His words, "I was very uncomfortable with him, and usually I am not that way with my clients, but I was with him." End quote. After receiving a haircut from the Highland Square barber and donning a new suit, Dahmer made his grand appearance in Akron Courthouse, with the Hicks family watching along with millions. On television, Dahmer admitted his guilt. Dahmer's trial was dominated by the question of his sanity, with expert opinions split significantly. Despite being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizotypical personality disorder, psychiatric disorders, Dahmer was ultimately found to be legally sane at his trial. He was convicted of 15 homicides in Wisconsin and one later in Ohio. I wonder which one they missed, because that adds up to 16. And he received multiple life sentences. Dahmer stated to the judge that he blamed nobody but himself, and he's glad that the jury found him sane, and he admitted, "Intellectually, I know this is the best thing that could have happened for me and everyone else involved, because I could not have stopped myself." Okay, well, a little bit later on, his dad and stepmom gave interviews to some talk shows, and I looked at the ones from Dr. Phil and Larry King. Sherry, the stepmom, is some piece of work. She was loving the spotlight in both interviews. She quickly interrupted and insisted that they all use the name Jeff and not Jeffrey, stating that we don't relate to that name. Dahmer's father recounts how his son used to ride around on a bicycle and pick up roadkill, drawing a disturbing connection between these actions and his emerging sexual urges. Did he not know at the time, or did he realize it later? Again, I have so many questions. King interviewed Lionel and Sherry Dahmer, and she had met Jeffrey at the age of 18 and said that they had an amicable relationship, emphasizing Jeff's emotional distance from his parents because of their tumultuous marriage. I don't think he had an emotional closeness in him. Lionel said that Jeffrey loved his mother despite her struggles with physical and mental challenges, and the weight of their famous surname was palpable in the conversation. Lionel resolutely stated his pride in the Dahmer name, tracing its lineage back to a self-made ancestor. Who wouldn't be proud of that, right? However, he acknowledged the necessity of occasionally having to be anonymous in public to avoid the unwanted attention and intense scrutiny that followed their son's horrific crimes. The constant awareness of their family's notoriety, King observed, was an unavoidable burden. Lionel confessed to the ever-present hesitation that accompanied using their last name in daily life. Okay, pump the brakes. Pump the brakes, y'all. What the fuck he doing on TV? Saying that he needs to keep his privacy? Yeah, bold face. Out there on public. Yeah, okay. Keep your privacy. Why didn't you do a phone interview if you just wanted to give information so people didn't know what you look like? But I suppose it's way too late for that. And Sherry now had her hat in the ring, so, oh yeah, the spotlight just loves her, doesn't it? Not really. But, okay, let's go on. Sherry, equally resolute, proclaimed her pride in her own identity and unwavering refusal to relinquish her surname. She and Lionel had committed no wrongdoing and therefore bore no shame. Yeah, this defiant stance underscored their determination to move forward. Wasn't their fault. They didn't do anything. So their discussion shifted to Jeff's brother, who is deliberately concealed, although specifics were withheld. Okay, so they say the specifics were withheld, but I think they already said too much. Lionel and Sherry conveyed his happiness in the recent addition of another grandchild to the family. This offered counterpoint to the darkness they shared in the past, a testament to the enduring hope for healing and future detached from their infamous Jeffrey Dahmer relative. Okay, stop again. Why they telling that this boy went on and changed his name, had a family, had a career? Okay, it's not going to take Sherlock to figure out who he is. And why are they on TV in an interview telling even that much? They should have put that off limits right from the beginning. Okay, I got nothing to say about them other than they're piece of shit garbage people. Lionel says we've lost a lot of family and a lot of people we knew, but we have a lot of friends who are proud of us, who are not ashamed of who we are, again, because we have done nothing wrong. So life is good for us. Okay, I'm proud of that for you, Lionel. Asshat. Lionel goes on to say, we are retired, and we have a lot of faith that has gotten us through this, and we have many good friends out there. When you make friends, if you make these friends in dire times, they stick with you. 7 months before Jeffrey's death, there was a Dateline interview with Stone Phillips. If you have never seen Stone Phillips do an interview, he is one of the best. Cream of the crop. And Dahmer contemplated his own dark impulses, and he said, if a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. End quote. Okay, Dad had just written the book. So Dad is out there, probably Sherry's foot in his butt to do it, but the body language between those two, if you ever get a chance to look at the Stone Phillips Dahmer interview, go take a look. The body language between father and son, they lean away from each other, hardly look at each other. They done with each other, really. Another creepy moment from that show is when the interview was over and everybody was standing up to leave. Jeffrey pointed at a small storage chest that was there on the set and said, I used boxes like that. Good boxes. Creepy AF. November 28th, 1994. Jeffrey Dahmer's life ended violently within the confines of Columbia Correctional Institution. Fellow inmate Christopher Scarver, already serving a life sentence for murder, brutally murdered Dahmer along with another inmate, Jesse Anderson. The prison staff, knowing of Scarver's hatred for Dahmer, had deliberately left the two men unsupervised so that Scarver would have his chance. Now, that is what a source, actually 3 sources, said. One can suppose that it might be true, although I can't point any fingers. Scarver stated that Dahmer was so disliked by fellow inmates that he required a personal escort of at least 1 guard whenever he was out of his cell to prevent inmates from attacking him. So why weren't they supervised this time? I leave that to you. Scarver later recounted his actions, describing Dahmer's unsettling behavior, the grotesque mockery of the human form using food and condiments. Yeah, he was doing stuff that disturbed even the most hardened criminals around him. At the time of his death, they were unattended and unrestrained. They were on a cleaning detail in the gym. Yeah, in the workout room. Dahmer and Anderson allegedly provoked Carver, like with a little jab in the back, and then coupled with their smirks and snarkiness, and it ignited a furious response. But I don't think that was all the way true. I think Scarver went in there with things in mind. So Scarver's carrying around this newspaper clipping in his pocket that detailed some of Dahmer's actions. Scarver seized a dumbbell from the gym. Remember the dumbbell from the first killing? Cruel irony, isn't it? And he confronted Dahmer in the locker room, asking him about the horrific details and showing him the newspaper clipping. Dahmer's non-reaction sealed his fate. He just stood there, stared, and said nothing. The guards discovered Dahmer and Anderson's body approximately 8:10 a.m. He succumbed to his injuries an hour later at the prison hospital. Scarver's stated motivation extended beyond the prison antics at mealtime. He perceived Dahmer as irredeemably wicked, a man devoid of remorse for his unspeakable acts. It was a swift and brutal attack. It was all over within 20 minutes. Scarver is now in a federal prison in Colorado and says that he hated Dahmer because of the taunting, and God had told him to do it. So that's it. Dahmer the cannibal had to die because he played with his food. But one more thing. He did leave a lasting impact. You remember the guy I told you about, Tracy Edwards, who had escaped and is the one that finally got Dahmer big busted? Yeah, he had escaped the apartment and was hailed as being a hero for ending the killing spree. 20 years later, almost to the day, Edwards was arrested and accused of throwing a man off a Milwaukee bridge and to his death. The defense attorney said he's like Humpty Dumpty. It was like he was never able to put the pieces back together. The sheer horror and pathological nature of Jeffrey Dahmer's deeds permanently altered some criminal history and how they investigate things. It raised significant questions about criminal culpability, police inadequacy, and the complex interplay of psychological factors in serial murder. His story remains a reminder of how childhood trauma, neglect, and inherent evil can converge to create a monster whose actions will forever scar the lives of countless families and communities for many years to come. That's me for this week, y'all. Sweet dreams. See you next week.